Good evening. Welcome to another session. This is part two of implementing business solutions in Azure. And just to do a quick recap, what we were building at, and we started building that in part one, was to build out a real-time financial reporting for a financial services company using Zenly as an API connector. So going back into Azure, we're just going to go back into Azure and continue from where we left off. So I'm going to go back into Azure here. I'm going to scroll into the resource group. We actually built out a couple of things, right? So these are all the things we built out so far. We have a database. We have a function app. We hooked our function app up and configured it so it's ready to go and it can communicate with our database. There's a couple of things we have to do from security standpoint, right? The, the first thing we got to do is that we need to actually go into a SQL database and allow it to connect to other systems. Because by default, when you install a SQL database, you cannot it's not by default it doesn't connect to any system inside of Azure. It's completely locked down. So we have to provide some connectivity, right? And this is where we go into what we call the set the server firewall. So firewalls are very important. The default, like initially when I set it up, was disabled. I'm going to select a network that I'm going to connect it to. If you're in a corporate environment, I recommend going with the Azure VNet rule, because what it does is that if you have an existing VNet, it will allow you to connect to an existing VNet, and that way you can communicate inside of your environment. So this actually you lock down your environment if you have an existing VNet. In my case, I don't have any VNet, so I'm just going to connect via an IP. So the two options that connect through a VNet, which is a virtual network, or you can connect through a private IP address, which is basically what I'm going to be doing because I need to be able to get into the database to do stuff. So I have to provide my IP address for this to work, right? And if you're working from home, or maybe you're setting up your local private Azure account, same system. So you're gonna go do basically what I'm doing. And the next thing you got to do is that you have to make sure it's available to allow other services to connect to it, right? So let me scroll down here. You can see that. And I hit save, and that will allow my Azure functions to communicate with my database, and everything is set up through the firewall. And the way you would test that once all this is set up correctly is that you go to a thing called SQL editor. So if you so scroll up here, so I go into my databases, and I click on the one database that I have, you should see in here, you should see what we call a query editor. This is still in preview mode, but I actually tend to use that for, it's basically a lightweight version of Management Studio. And then this is just testing my connectivity to make sure I have access. And if this works correctly, that means I can authenticate and do what I need to do. And because we already seeded the database, we should have some predefined files out here. So this is basically the AdventureWorks database. I can do a select up to 1000. I can actually put the data back in, right? So doesn't look like there's any messages in that one. Okay, that's empty. Find that interested. Let's try that one. Let's do select 1000 here. Let's select all, run that. So I have data coming back. So now we know that data is coming back here. This is seeded data. It was a brand new database. I actually seeded some data in here. But the key thing here is that the client wants to be able to report on this data, right? So they have a couple of store procedures here. We want to be able to work with some other store procedures. So now the other thing you can do now, if you're inside of Azure and you want to connect to your local machine, you don't necessarily have to come into Azure and connect to that. Microsoft provides a Azure Data Studio, which allows you to connect to your environment. We go to the Overview tab. If I remember correctly how this works, I'm going to cancel out here. And I don't know why this is so slow today, but okay, one more time. All right. Yeah, it's a little slow today. All right, so you can it says connection, the different ways to connect, right? So the one you want to do is you want to do Azure Data Studio. And then if you haven't got that downloaded, you can download it here, or you can launch it directly from your environment, right? So if you do have it already, you can launch it now and it's going to look for a local version of your machine, which is basically a Chromium application, and it's going to try to launch Azure Data Studio if you have it installed on your local machine. In my case, I do have it installed, so that'll take a minute to install, right? But in the meantime, while that is loading up, we can actually try to test our API connectivity, right? So I have seeded to save time. I've already set up a Postman. If you haven't used Postman before, I recommend going to the Postman site. I'm just going to pull this up for you here. Just taking this time to get rid of this. Some performance issues going on over here today. A second here. Let's close this. We don't need that anymore. All right, so I'm going to bring in these. So let me get this out of the way. You can see it. So here's the test case, database API as a service. We're actually going to be creating a new one, which is going to be 2022, 2024, it's 1202. And I want to make sure that's correct. So I want to make sure I'm doing this correctly. So I have to go into resource group, come up here, go into our resource group, go into our function app. And then what I can do when I go into the function app, I can grab the actual base URL, which is that here, and I can go into my API here and make sure I just replace the base URL. So this is the base URL here. I replace that, and that represents the correct URL. Now, in the headers, we talked about the XAPI key, which is basically referring to the storage account which we have connected locally, right? So if we go back into our storage account, I'm going to scroll over here and try to keep this open. This is the storage account that we're working in, right? So this storage account here, go over here, go back into our storage account, go into our containers, open up the config file which we store, and this is the storage account we're working with right in here. And I'm going to edit this here, paste it, save this. And now we can walk through the steps. I'm going to turn all these capabilities off here. So one of the things that the config file allows you to do is allow you to actually customize it the way you want to. So I tend to give my storage accounts, my config files names. So this is a searching DB for reports. You don't have to, but it's just keeping it simple, right? So that way, if someone is looking at this config file, they know what it's for. And then what you can do when you start testing is you can turn this off. Now, this is a circuit breaker, so you can actually turn each step off. So you can make this false. We can also make this false as well because we're using a circuit breaker here. And then we can hit send. And this is just to see whether my API can communicate with my config. And this is the config here represents your API key. Now, this API key is a GUID. You can create multiple versions of different GUIDs. You can run it against a GUID creator. I just use a GUID creator, so you can create multiple GUIDs. And that GUID represents your API, so you can provide some sense of security around your APIs because you're exposing it publicly. Or you put it behind an application gateway or some kind of gateway to have an additional layer of protection if you wanted to. Now, if I do default out of the box, I do a search, get rid of that. I'm going into my raw format. I'm using JSON. Uh, and I just open up two curly brackets here. I can easily just do a search here. And I'm just typing this verbatimly here. So I'll just do search here. And I'm going to put in the same select statement that I got from my database. So let's go back to my database. Let's open up the SQL database here. Where in it I'm going to go. Sign into a window. we're just going to pull up an AdventureWorks database and we're going to go through that. Right? Just so what we're doing right now is we're establishing connectivity between the API and the backend database to ensure that we can pull the data back out. That's what we're doing right now. This button, um, go into open up here through a lightweight query editor, type in our password. And then what we're doing here is we're going to just do a quick select where we're just going to select the first 1,000 products, right? And that's our statement. So this is the statement we're going to use to test our API. So without doing any additional coding, we're just going to take this select statement as is. I'm going to put it into our backend system. The expectation is that it should work or it shouldn't work, or depends what the situation is. But let's see what happens, right? So we're going to put the statement here, and we're going to run this to make sure see what happens. As you can see, just echo that back. There's no change. So this is where the circuit breaker comes in, right? We're not really calling the backend. We're just echoing what we put into our database, into our data, echoing what we put into our request as coming back in our response, right? And the reason why that is because, like I mentioned to you in the config file, it's a circuit breaker. I mean that this is not going to work unless I make changes. Now, we're not really going to be doing any statements right now, but technically what a statement is that we're going to build the request to the way we want it. And we're going to talk about that later on. I'm going to keep this off for now. I'm going to turn this statement on, which is the statement we're going to use to test the connectivity to our database. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to go back to our API and run another test and see what happens. Voila, we have data, right? We will have thumbprints that are coming back that represents what an image will look like. We actually have products that are coming back that represents this. These are all the photos that represents that. So this is the binary representation of that file that's coming out of our backend system, right? It's telling you what kind of file it is. It's bringing that back. So we've proven just by a couple steps that we can bring back data. But obviously, the data that we're trying to report on, this is not the data we're reporting on, but we want to be able to at least isolate or report on specific data points that the business is interested in, right? So that brings us to open up, can open up Studio. If you never used Azure Data Studio, I would recommend downloading it. It's a very good tool. Let's see if I can open this up. Don't show this again. Let's go here. And then you can connect to a new database from here. Now you can connect to a database. Let me cancel this. This is connecting to the new database that we have. So we have the SQL database. When we open it, when we launch it, it actually puts in some parameters for us. It tells us what we're connecting to. And all we have to provide here is the type of login we're doing. We're doing a SQL login, which is the default. We provide the username to SQL admin, and then we're going to provide a password, which is the password I use to authenticate. And hopefully, if everything goes right, because my IP is whitelisted, I should be able to get into the database here. We're seeing basically the same things we're seeing in terms of views, in terms of this thing. Now, obviously, the business requirement was able to see views. So we want to be able to select views, which we built and want to be able to show that. So we can grab these views directly from here and paste that into our API, right? So, and that's proven, we've already proven that works, right? So if I take this view, paste it in here, make a couple of adjustments. So it's on one screen. And then if I run this, we should get a different data set. So we're basically saying now we're schemaless, right? So we don't have any schemas tied to our responses. We have data coming back. So from a request response perspective, the client is very happy. We can actually pull data back out. We can pull views back out. We can actually introduce the concept of store procedures, right? So if I wanted to get into, give me a second here. If I want to create a new store procedure, we can actually create. a new store procedure as well. Here a second and pick one up. So we can get a store procedure here. We can go into our API here. We can use if you want to use if it's as this data studio, it's the same thing. You can just create a store procedure. We're going to create a store procedure where we're just going to get the sales data. So let's just focus on one column here. We're going to just get the parent. We're going to pass in the parent method. So we're going to say we're going to pass in the parent product. Let me make this right. Parent product category name. That's what I'm passing in. And we're going to have as an example char. And I'm going to do is select here just to keep it simple. Select 1000. Grab that. Go over here. Keep the as is. And then we're going to select this statement. And we're going to do a where um, this guy equals at here. So this is basically what we didn't do here is we're creating this store proc. I'm going to run that. Hopefully that should execute. Was successful. So now we have a new store prop we can use, right? So now we want to be able to use this store procedure in our code base instead of our config file. So now we have to do some work to get that going, right? So now we want to, so the original one I turned off, we're going to turn that back on. So we're going to make this true. We're going to now pass in the search for our exec statements. So if we go back to our code base here, let's run an exec on this guy, right? So we know if we go here, we can see that we're getting top one. So we can do an exec, and then we can call our store procedure, which we have here, which is called insert products, which I should have changed the name. I forgot how to do this. Insert product, and then we'll pass in the name of what we're trying to insert. So we just want to get the product name, and we're going to do bike racks is what we're going to do as our product names. Yeah, we're going to select all that. I'm going to try to run and see what we get. So we get one record back, right? And that's exactly what we're going to do in the actual configuration file instead of our code base. So we're going to go back to our config file. We're going to do the exact same thing in here, right? We're going to keep that simple. But this is going to come in as a parameter. So the product name has to be parameterized. So what we've chosen to do is that we're going to make that a parameter. We're going to have a dollar sign. We're going to open up here. And we can call it whatever we want. I'm just calling it a dollar sign because I'm in the references later on. And then we're going to call it the product name. Just call it product name. Keep it simple, right? We're going to grab the same thing here. And we're going to filter here the product name. I'm going to call this product name, right? And this product name now, if we save this, becomes to secure our environment even more without having to make any modifications to our API. Rather than having a select statement like this, which is what we originally had, we can actually have a product name with a, a variation coming from our code base. So if we go back here, we originally had looking for bike racks, which is what we had. And then we can place in a bike rack here and we can see what they can test and see where that works. So that brought back one record. So that's how simply we can actually take our code from just writing a straight select statement and we provide some store procedures around how we can call our database. So now we have a store procedure right now that's bringing back data that's related to a bike rack. So now that the client is happy, we can actually start looking at how we can ingest more financial data into our system. So we're going to into our code base here, and then Max, this tool actually gives you a way to ingest data into your system. So if I can remember correctly how to do this, I think if you right click on here, you should be able to manage, I think it is. It's been a while since I've done this. New query, I think it is. It's not very intuitive. I'm trying to figure out how to do this here. Let's go into our tables. I'm gonna spend too much time trying to figure this out. But there's a way you can actually import data into your backend system. It actually offered that option. Edit connection. Oh yeah, import wizard. That's it. It's right in my face. I didn't see it. So the import wizard allows you to import sample data into your backend system. So let me pick up some testing data that we can use. It's going to use some credit card transaction testing data. Not that many records that we're going to be pulling back. Let's go with something very small to start off with because this is a demo. We don't want to bring big piece of data in as a demo. And just to make sure that we're bringing in brand new data, we're going to test this. It's just like, I think it's like 10,000 records or something, nothing crazy. We're going to call it credit test. We're going to keep the defaults. It's going to go and do and validate to make sure that the actual CSV file we're actually importing is makes sense. This is all this data that's coming back out here. Hit next. It's going to ask us, you want to allow things to know. Like this does get very sketchy because if you do imports, it might throw exceptions and then you have to go back and fix it. So it's not telling you that NA is not acceptable. So what we can do to make life easier is to turn a lot of these things into varchars just to so we can get going. So this is varchar, amount, term. It is the data types are important, and I'm gonna emphasize that you have the data type, but the data we have is not that clean. So this actually does schema validation and data type validation based on the selections we made here. And it kind of figures out what the fields are based on the first row, but obviously that's not the case all the time. The first row might be right, but the second row is not. And then we can try to import the data one more time. Everything is successful, hit done. And then what will happen is now we have this new record in here. Then if you refresh the table and go into our tables, we can actually see a new one for credit right here. So we select top 1000, we should get all that credit data back. So this actually gives you a way to look at the data, look at all the data. So this is the information that the client wants to be able to build a store procedure around, right? And what we're going to do for this demo is not necessarily have to provide a store procedure. For that, we've actually proven that we can actually create store procedures and call store procedures from our API. We're just proving that we can actually call different tables inside of our API here without having to build out a new solution, right? So if you go back to our original search, which is what we had before, and then we paste in this line of code. What this does is gets you out the door very quickly, right? So if you just want to do a quick sanity test, you want to make sure that all your data, all your fields are matching. There's a lot of fields I'm actually putting in here. I should have actually cleaned this up a little bit before I brought it in. But since it's a live demo, we're going to go with it. We're going to clean this up manually, but it's not going to run. Unfortunately, we're having to, there's a lot more fields in here. So let's try doing this quicker. There's a quicker way of doing this. I don't think there's a quicker way of doing this, but yeah, let's just go with the slow way. But this here, so there. And it's actually I didn't choose the best example, but financial data is always has a lot of columns associated with it. So this is just busy work, I call it, just to get it get the statement going. And obviously it's actually wrapping around to two statements. There we go. I think we're in a good place. So if I hit this send button now, we should get an error. It's not going to find, we get an exception here said product name is fine. So this is where the schema validation comes in. When you put filters in your code base, is looking for specific properties that associate with that. So that's where the validation comes in. And I always recommend in your config file when you set this option up, always turn this search option up so you can validate the data that's coming through, so you can control how your store procedures or your SQL statements are actually controlled. Because if you have this feature turned off here, which is what I'm going to do, it gives you blanket access into your store procedures, into your backend systems, and that would still result in what you're trying to do here. This is bringing back all our data sets, as you can see, coming back very, very clean. So in the third session, we're going to talk about monitoring. How do we monitor all our APIs? How do we make sure that when we're making these calls, how long these APIs taking? Because remember, you're handing this off to Power BI guys, guys that do business intelligence. That might be querying a flavor of data. You want to understand how the performance of your database is doing while you're querying this data. And then you might have alerts that you want to set up to ensure that you don't hit certain thresholds, so you're not overworking your database. So we'll see you back in the third session. Thank you very much.